So I'd love to just have a quick round of introductions. I can start and then I'll sort of go down the line here, but I'm Maddie Mackin-Freeman. I'm the design director here at DESIGN+BUILD. So I lead our team of architects, interior designers, furniture managers, and we work with our construction team really closely to talk about how to actually build the space from the very beginning of our design engagement with our clients. So I'll start.
And I'm a student over at PSU, and I study neuroscience. I also work with Northwest Noggin. I'm a volunteer, and we go to low-income schools, community centers, youth outreach shelters, and correctional facilities, and just teach about the brain, about the body. We use arts to engage people and also to engage different parts of your brain to make the information more accessible, but also just so that it sticks a little deeper. This is Rhodey. Rosito. This is my seizure signal dog, very important for my life, as I have sporadic daily seizures. So he also had PTSD training before I got him. So he signals for cortisol spikes, norepinephrine, epinephrine spikes, stress hormones. So if he looks at you and maybe tries to give you the paw, maybe a little stressed out, he helps all of us.
Yes.
Yeah. I love it.
We got a bonus on our panel.
So I'm Darcy Southwell. I have a consulting firm, Southwell Solutions. I focus on equity and inclusion in the workplace. Mostly work with small to medium-sized businesses, doing assessments as far as how can they build equity into, let's say, their recruiting practices and access a much larger talent pool. Also doing workshops on inclusive communication, inclusive leadership.
I'm Jenny Perlmutter, architect by training, so you kind of in my element here. Most recently, I was at Nike, leading up workplace design for them, workplace delivery, and then that really led into workplace strategy. So that's kind of my bread and butter right now is workplace strategy, looking at kind of when we think of the future and we think of our future workforce and our current workforce, what do they want and how do we better prepare ourselves to provide the right physical spaces for that workforce?
So today I'd like to start with just defining neurodiversity and what we are talking about when we say that. So would you mind giving us a little quick introduction?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, neurodivergence or neurodiversity are simply like differences in the physiological aspects of our brains. With neurodivergent people, like you said, there's a spectrum. We all know about the spectrum, but it's not just one spectrum. Like they talk about the autism spectrum. There's also ADHD spectrum and everything in between. So physiologically, we're ADHD's on one side of the spectrum, autism's on the other. People tend to fall in between. So there's a normal curve. People tend to fall in the middle. So some aspects of this, some aspects of this. With ADHD and autism, I think what is talked about probably the most is sensory perceptual differences. So there's overloads of stimulus or underloads of stimulus. Less talked about, but basically your hippocampal region develops a bit faster. The front of your brain parts that do reasoning and feeling, and then that affects the pathways in your brain that make you feel secure and safe, that make you, kind of understand the world. Well, when you develop faster than the rest of your peers, you don't have the tools, you don't have the cognitive tools yet, or the social tools to deal with what's going on in your brain. It just makes everything feel a little more intense. So it's also kind of a difference in compartmentalization from ADHD to autism. Like ADHD, when we talk with the kids, we're kind of like, you're kind of floating in your feelings. Whereas if you're on the autism end of the spectrum, you're trying to rapidly compartmentalize. When the friction comes, is either you're floating too long and you can't get your feet on the ground if you're on the ADHD side. If you're on the autism side, if something doesn't fit into compartments that you already have built, there's dissonance, don't know what to do, and that can cause like disruption. Either way, it's kind of just dealing with disruptions and being able to plan for disruptions ahead of time. is a major part of living with neurodiversity. My family is neurodiverse. I am neurodivergent. I am from 4 generations deep neurodivergence. So I learned many like coping things from my grandpa, you know, before there were terms for these kinds of things, for the differences in our brains. Just like, our family works this way. People don't understand it. Here's what we do about it. So a lot of what I do is kind of working with kids and adults as well. More with kids, but teaching of like what that means and what you can do about it, how to use your brain.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. That's super interesting and also perfect segue into each of your experiences with neurodivergence or neurodivergent folks. So, did you have anything you wanted to add before I move on to Darcy?
Oh,
Okay, Darcy.
Yeah, so I am actually neurotypical. I think my experience is with colleagues I've had over the years. And I would say years ago, there was like, oh, well, they're just hard to work with. You know, and now we're recognizing that they're not hard to work with. The brain works different. And so how can I adjust? And I had one colleague who, amazing colleague, so intelligent, but had these, I would say a lot of people called them quirks in the office, always wanted their door shut, always wanted their lights off, really got upset if you stopped by and wanted to chat. It's like, and I started realizing if I would just send a message and say, hey, can we talk about this? And, you know, when's a good time for you? And all of a sudden, I wasn't getting the resistance anymore. And other people were still struggling and saying, you know, oh, they're so difficult. I'm like, no, not really. You just, you know, adjust your way of thinking because, you know, they're trying to fit into my world. Why am I not trying to fit into theirs? So, I mean, my experience has all been with trying to figure out how to work really well with someone who's, you know, our brains work different. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's great. And I like what you said about just the neurotypical folks not having the training, not knowing what to do, and sort of that societal approach that's, oh, they're quirky or they're difficult. That's not the current conversation. I think that's obviously really positive.
It's changing finally.
Yes, yeah.
well, a lot of people don't know they're neurodivergent.
Yeah.
A lot of people just think they have these specific things that they want to do or don't know why things bother them, like textures and feelings and things. It's like, oh, it's just different sensory, like literally different perceptions in your neuron, in your pyramidal cells, you know, like there's just,
That's a cool vocab on that.
it's not a moral failing or a personal quirk. It's literally just, this is how you work.
Yeah.
And I would say that I'm on kind of the beginning end of that journey, kind of compared with you all, of learning more about it. And especially as I raise my kids and kind of watch how they learn and watch their peers and start to see all these differences. And it's really starting to come up in kind of just like normal lexicon, all these different learning styles or processing styles, that it's been, for me, I'm in the place of discovery of starting to understand traits that I see either in my kids or in myself or in others, of like, oh, that's just slightly different. It's not necessarily good or bad, and how we start to acknowledge those and talk about them and start to kind of design and create a world where all those different styles can thrive. So I'm at the beginning of the journey, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, that's how we start.
Yeah.
So I'd love to dive in, and this is sort of whoever would like to. I'm like acutely aware of stressed out people in our roadie. I'd love to just jump in for whoever would like to answer, but how we can kind of starting to go to challenges and benefits and sort of where we connect this with workspace. So the first question I want to ask is, how do we transition from a remote work environment to a hybrid, meaning part in person and part remote, or fully in person? And then that will go into sort of how we can converge the two topics of neuroscience and office attendance.
Spaces like these are a pretty good example of how you can accommodate, how you can have, like, incentivize people coming back to work where there are personal spaces. A lot of being a college student in the pandemic and being at home a lot and then transitioning to going to school on campus was a big difference. What I liked about home was I can wiggle. I can do my things. I can set a timer. We use timers a lot. Like for neurodiversity, it's very important to have a little something that helps you gauge time because of just difference in perception as far as time goes. But yeah, having a safe space where I can do whatever I want. I can get up and jog during class, and I'm still here. Whereas in school, there's not that same opportunity. But at workplaces like this, you can have, you have the rooms, the isolated rooms that are you could just go in if you need a time. Or you can walk around. It's wide open spaces where you can walk around. Daylight is extremely important, extremely helpful. So having light or daylight bulbs. I use daylight bulbs when I have to in the winter, just to kind of get the brain going, get our endorphins flowing. So yeah, for me, that's
extra important in this part of the world.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is it's all about choice, right? And there's a lot of choice, I think, in when you should come in, how often you should come in, kind of if you should come in. There's that end of choice. But since we're kind of talking about the physical workspace, then choice within the workspace is really important in terms of if you take focus, for example. People focus in many different ways, and some people need very little stimulation. They want it to be as kind of isolated as possible. They might want it pretty low lighting, so lighting controls and that focus. Other people need actually a ton of stimulation. So how do you have kind of loud, vibrant spaces that offers that din going on in the background for people to focus? And then sometimes people want to focus either alone or they want to focus in groups. Maybe there's, I think about kind of a lot of our coders and engineers, they need some deep focus, but they might be working with someone on something and they want to be focusing next to each other so they can quickly kind of come out of their focus and ask each other questions. So it's really understanding how do you create all these layered different experiences. And a lot of times they're kind of opposite, very loud, very quiet, and layering those all into a workspace. So when it's smaller, it's kind of hard, but you can kind of think about, if I thought about this workspace, how you utilize other parts of the building and the amenities to provide some of those options. And then really thinking about the policies of the management, et cetera, of how you allow for that autonomy and that agency to have that choice so that people can really choose what works best for them, because everyone has different needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. It's a lot about choice and giving people agency to make those decisions and figure out what works well for them. When you have total control of your environment at home, and whether it is more stimuli, less stimuli, loud noises, quiet lighting, etc., and then you come into a workspace, the more everyone has that access to control what works for them, everyone becomes more productive. And so it really is about the choice, I feel like, and the flexibility of having all of these options. And especially if you're redesigning your space, have dimmable lighting. So over here it can be, really bright maybe, or for the engineers, they want it maybe a little darker. Build the flexibility in from the very beginning, because then everyone has sort of taken control and can find a space that really helps them be productive and focused.
We were finding on the lighting component, we were finding a lot that in general, I think we're way over lighting our spaces. A lot of people, especially doing screen work, want a dimmer environment. But then you want to be able for kind of, as people age, their eyes age, they need additional light. So we'd start to think about personal lighting, having task lighting, kind of mandatory at every workstation, so that you could have some control and really up your lighting in those instances. So how you start to create kind of individual choices within a group setting. And I think that's one of the hardest things to balance is how to create this sense of individuality while still collectively existing in a space together.
Especially for the larger workforces, right?
Yes.
I mean, coming from Nike, that's not a small company to try to support. Darcy, I'd like to go back to your work, and if you could give us a quick introduction into DEIB and what it means and how that is can be incorporated into people's workspace. And I think that especially the B people might not have heard before. It'd be good to get your take on that.
Yeah, so DEI was the sort of the original acronym. It's becoming DEIB. Some people are even adding an A for an accessibility. So B is belonging. So diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility potentially. I think it's all around a strategy that companies are choosing, and then the policies and decision making that go along with that. I would say that, inclusion and equity are the critical components. Diversity is really a result. And to some degree, even belonging as a result. If you focus on making decisions centered on equity, and it's just what you were talking about, it is having options and considering what are all of the needs that your employees have, whether they're neurotypical, neurodiverse, somewhere in the middle, or anything else. It's about making it accessible for every human to be productive and come to work and thrive. And so just making sure that your policies reflect that, your decisions, your resources, where you spend your money reflects that. So when you're planning a build, think about that. And then how your leaders lead in the office every day when they're making decisions. The more they think about equity and inclusion, the more everyone feels like they are welcome and they can come to work and be productive.
Yeah.
And I think too, with the leaders, kind of for them to recognize their limitations, right? Everyone comes with their own set of experiences, and they're never going to fully have a first person viewpoint of, all the experiences.
Right.
And so the more I think that they come with a really humble mindset of, I'm not going to understand this, and to be asking questions of others to make sure that it is inclusive.
Yeah.
And going to that, I would like to, not to say, everybody define all of exactly what you do, but I would, Jenny, like to hear a little bit about what workplace strategy is, and then how we can sort of combine all three of your specialties and your topics of interest into this conversation around how we incorporate that in workspace. So if you wouldn't mind, workplace strategy.
The way that I really think about it is work is continuing to change. How we work, when we work, where we work. It's not static right now. We're in a new era, and I don't think where we are right now is the final destination. It's continuing to change. And it is changing quickly. I think our understanding is coming up to speed. If you think about the rate of change of technology, it's an ever accelerating change. Design and construction inherently is slow. Even though the schedules feel really fast, it is very slow. And it's very inflexible at the end of the day. Physical portfolio isn't, you can't kind of reprogram your computer. You can reprogram digital computer quickly. You can't reprogram your space really quickly. And so I really think about workplace strategy as trying to solve all of those really challenging tensions, right? The tension of how slow design and construction is, and how kind of immovable your physical portfolio is, with all of these incredibly changing moments we have in our workforce and workplace, and how we work in technology. And it's reconciling all of those to ask a lot of questions and to try to plan flexibility for the future, and to try to almost future-proof some of your decisions, and kind of do the best you can to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. Okay. So
is that helpful?
It's very much so.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about planning. This is kind of an early part of a project that you would do a workplace strategy session or visioning.
Yeah, and I would say kind of on a more tactical level, I've spent a lot of time working on activity-based workplace, which I'm guessing most of you are familiar with, which is really the idea that your workplace is designed around the work itself that is happening, not necessarily you as an individual. And then you use the workplace essentially as a tool to get your work done. And what I was most recently doing was looking at how people's jobs are different and how they need different things out of a workplace. If you take that engineer, for example, the amount of focus that they're going to need and what they need out of a physical workspace is going to be very different than a manager, right? Who's in meetings all day, is working face to face with people all day. So when they come in, what they need when they come in is going to be very different. And I was spending a lot of time with thinking about how you start to standardize that across a really large enterprise to create some policies that have a little more flexibility in them versus everyone comes in and sits at their desk, because the nature is we're all very different people doing very different work, and we have different needs out of our physical spaces.
Yeah, that word choice coming back in
Yes.
again.
Yeah.
So, what are some ways that you've seen? I'll start with you, Jenny, and then move on to Darcy. And I'd be curious about your experience too, Katie. So we'll go down the line. What are some examples you've seen of how a company can incorporate inclusivity into their culture?
I'll almost let you start with culture.
Yeah.
Culture, because culture starts with the people.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to, because we kind of take like, how does it then show up in the place? I don't know if you want to start with the people.
I think one of the keys, I think it's especially applicable when we talk about workspaces, go ask your employees. You can create a very inclusive culture by making it a practice of consulting your staff. And there's lots of ways you can do that. And I always encourage clients to use various tools, because some employees are going to be perfectly happy sitting down and sharing their ideas with you. Others are going to be a little hesitant. But the more you can ask them about their experience and about their needs, the more you're going to learn what those are, and you're not guessing, and they got a voice in it. And it becomes a very inclusive environment when employees have a voice in what's going on.
So even just the wanting to ask your employees is indicative of inclusivity.
Yeah, and it starts to build, especially when you do it on a lot of different topics. When every time you ask, you build a little more trust, because you start to establish a little more inclusivity, and it becomes a habit after a while. And pretty soon, it's that inclusion is just like the fabric that's running through the organization, because you're doing something so simple as asking them.
I love that. So we, in our workplaces at Nike, we would get a lot of consultants coming in, telling us how to make it really inclusive, really accessible. And we would kept getting this, but I think one of the most powerful things that we did is we gathered up a group that was willing to speak about all of their differences of abilities, or physical, mental, cognitive, etc. And they came in and they talked to everyone who's responsible for the physical environments, and hearing those stories firsthand really made you realize the intent of what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day and what matters. We had a woman that worked for me had a prosthesis, and she was talking about how on rainy days the transition of materials on the flooring could be really slippery for her, and how important it was to have a walk-off mat at the entry. And I used to think, as previous architect designer, walk-off mats, those are so ugly, right? Who wants those? And you realize, and she would say, she might be walking with a manager, and she would all of a sudden be focusing on not slipping versus the conversation she was trying to have, and how much it would be kind of consuming for her, because she didn't want to embarrass herself. And so I think those personal anecdotes are so powerful in really having empathy and understanding for people that have differences, and how you can start to create environments that include them. So I think the more you ask and listen and try to really understand and put yourselves in their shoes, I think better.
Yeah, I think that word empathy, I heard from Darcy, trust. Those are two things that I think are kind of at the core of DEIB and A.
Yeah.
That's, just such I think that's the kind of transition, if you zoom out over the last many decades, that we're starting to see more trust in employees, more empathy for the people we're working with, and allowing people to be different. And then Katie, I know that you as a college student may not have the same kind of work experience, but I'm curious about your experience in school, and like what kinds of things have been inclusive, or maybe some not so inclusive things. What are kind of things that you've seen?
I mean, a lot of school's pretty good. You know, the universities are pretty good about checking in with students, about getting feedback, about asking what people need and how to accommodate that. Even just like providing materials that are both written and have a visual component, allowing people to wear headphones during tests if they need sound during tests rather than silence during tests, you know, having alternate spaces and having study spaces that are open to everyone where you can come and you can body double, you can co-work, and you can get things done without necessarily having, you can like, we call it like, body doubling, but when you help regulate, it's co-regulation, helping regulate each other. If somebody gets off for a second, there's always going to be like 3 or 4 other people that can get you back on. But it also just helps having other people there sometimes, and sometimes you just need a little hole to crawl into to just decompress for a little bit. So I feel like hearing people's voices and asking about it is definitely a part of it. It can also be difficult because there can be so many voices and everyone's like, well, I want my particular thing.
Yeah.
But I guess the more knowledge people have about how our brains work, how our minds work, to keep us motivated, to keep us focused or unfocused, depending on what we want, is I don't know, the most important thing. That kind of comes to like the benefits of being neurodivergent and like why now workplaces are seeking out people who are neurodivergent, because we tend to have a lot more bandwidth. And a lot of that is because we don't naturally, our dopamine receptors are, our endorphins, our happy feeling chemicals tend to be dampened. So we have to do more just to feel good, just to feel okay. We have to do more. And that in workplace can be great because we also are able to oscillate, multimodal oscillation. We can do work on what seems like 4 projects, 5 projects at once, but really we're taking turns between all of them to get them done. Whereas if there's only one project to work on, that could take forever to get done because it just doesn't hold enough stimulation to generate the endorphins we need to focus on it. And then there's hyper-focus or flow state, which I feel like people are talking about all the time now. And if you have neurodivergent people that tend to have higher capacity to go into hyper-focus and can lose days doing projects. We have like a whole crew in the at DSU, we have the Interdisciplinary Neuroscience Association, which I'm now the president of. I was the vice president for last year. And we have a whole crew of engineers who do computer engineering and civil engineering that come each week, you know, and it's really interesting to go see their layers because it does feel like that. It's like going down into a sub-basement where it's dark and there's like humming and, you know, all of the noises of all the machines, but they're all doing their own things but helping each other. So they have like, when they're like doing, I don't know, it's like coding stuff that's far beyond me, but they have like Discord or something, so they can chat literally like right here without breaking like the computer focus, you know what I mean? So everybody, there are amazing ways, there are things out there that help facilitate this, but having spaces where that's okay is the other thing. It's really, and it's like the culture you were saying. Is this okay? Is this acceptable to have in a workplace environment? And I guess what we're all saying is yes.
Yeah. And I love, I kept trying to encourage kind of our team to look at universities, look at colleges, what are they doing? Because I think they offer so much more choice and you get to see how that manifests. You're talking about the engineers and when people are given that autonomy and kind of to find their pocket of where they work and they can kind of move around, etc. I think there's so many amazing examples there, whereas the workplace I think has been much more homogenous in the past. Whereas I think universities have adapted a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point because you think about the difference between a workspace and a college or a university, and you know, it's who's paying who, right? And so you have students who are able to maybe advocate for themselves and for their groups, their communities, more so than people may feel like they can at work. And so I think that's a really interesting. It's a great point that looking at universities might have some ideas about how to be innovative about this.
Well, in some ways, I often look at it as they're almost being treated more like adults, right? Because they're given like, this is what you need to do by this timeline. Go do it. I don't care where you do it, right? I don't care when you do it, but go do it. And it is very much based off of outcomes, whereas the workplace still is like, are you sitting in your seat? then you're doing your work, which,
Like
you know,
monitoring.
and people just work so differently. And I think the workplace is really great for certain populations, and for others, it needs to change a little bit and evolve.
Yeah. Well, another perfect segue. So what are some, we've talked about a few of these things just sort of off the cuff, but what are some specific environments that you've seen that can be kind of, you were talking about opposite kinds of environments. What are some ways that you've seen different work styles and work preferences integrated into workspace design?
I'm a broken record about choice. I don't know if there's much
Consistency.
more to say there.
Yeah.
There's questions on that, but I think at the end of the day, you need all of these opposites to exist. And I really lean in hard to sometimes saying some of those environments might be best elsewhere. Some of them are perfect in the office, and then other ones might be best at home. You know, some of that deep focus work that's alone, people are able, to your point, to perfectly set it up at home. And it was a really hard adjustment coming back into the office, because it's never going to be as good as your home workspace if you have the luxury of having your own space at home. So really looking hard at what you want your physical office to do, and then how you facilitate those outcomes to the whole spectrum of people that are coming in.
Yeah.
I know those aren't specifics,
No,
but I think
it's-
from a strategic standpoint, that's kind of how we look at it.
Yeah.
Seems like we're kind of aiming for better than home. There's being things that you can get at work that you can't get at home for the incentivization. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have any space at my home where I can just go and really be alone and be quiet. And you have that here, you know, so it is a matter of finding that balance.
I think that's kind of, people come from all different spaces, and so the office can function differently for different types of people and different types of brains. Yeah.
Well, and I think to your point about strategy, I think there's a lot of decisions you can make from a strategic perspective about and focus on the outcome of the work and not the how they're working, and allow that choice. I'm a broken record too, but allow the choice. If you're going to do a hybrid situation and you can build the space that accommodates so many different work styles, but then a particular employee has a particular project where they really can do it better at home right now, have that flexibility, because ultimately what you want is really great outcomes. And your outcome is not necessarily dictated by doing it the way it's always traditionally been done. So if we can have that choice, have that flexibility, and focus on the outcomes when you think about leadership in a strategic perspective, it'll be a very different experience for employees who come in, or maybe they choose today to work from home.
And I think too, I want to speak for the other end, because I think I over-index because I have 2 young kids at home. So I'm kind of like, how do I have some flexibility to be at home? There are other people in different life circumstances. They want to come in more. They want mentorship. They want that feeling of connecting with their company, with connecting with the values of their company and the leadership of their company. And so, how do you get that connection to the company and what it stands for? You have to come in. You have to be in person. And how do you design those environments to feel really good and to feel really inclusive? So at the beginning you're saying you get that hit of that feeling to make you want to come back, right? And you can't get that at home.
Yeah,
So.
I think you're referring to earlier, Katie mentioned, I think this might have been before the panel started, but Katie had mentioned incentivization to come back to the office. And so how do you both provide something that you can't get at home and also support the options, the choice?
Physiologically, neuronally, for incentive, we need something that's new and something that's familiar. And that makes us want something. That makes us need something. So that's what we were talking about earlier, is if at your workplace, you have new things coming all the time, you have that kind of stimulation, then having something familiar is like maybe your thing that you play with on your desk or whatever you look at, or, you know. But if you don't have that, if it's more of a repetitious thing, then there's got to be a way to facilitate that. So if you can have a place at work that can facilitate you bringing in your own thing, then that'll bring people in. Mm-hmm. And light is a huge part of that, just because of our circadian rhythms, how we work. We are like, we wake up with light, but we're also invigorated by light, and we can also get exhausted by light. So it depends on the frequencies also. The closer to daylight, the better for the morning, but you hit 12 and after, it needs to start, calming down generally
yeah.
But yeah.
And it's an amazing time to be in this field, I think. I find it infinitely fascinating. There's, you're speaking about lighting. There's this company we were exploring kind of a partnership with, and they're looking at how lighting affects productivity, how it affects focus, how it affects your sleep. And they're literally tuning, everyone has their own like lighting program, and there are pro athletes out there using it. Mm-hmm. And it literally shows, they have outcomes of how you sleep better, you focus at work better. And it could just be like this little lamp in your focus room. It's like, how cool is that you can have your employees sleep better at home, be happier in the office, just with this special lighting in your focus room.
Mm-hmm. Well, to go just for 1 second, to go back to inclusivity and an inclusive culture, one of the really important things I think, between what both of you said, is making sure that employees understand that we're all different. And the fact that, Joni didn't come in today and worked at home versus, Joe, who wants to come into the office every day, it is because we are all different, and we all have different reasons for doing that. And for some of us, it's because there are young kids at home and we want to get out of there. Mm-hmm. Or I live in a multi-generational home and I've got a lot of people here, so I can't focus. I can focus at the office. Other people, their workspace at home is perfect. So it also includes educating your staff and getting everyone to recognize that we're all individuals and we're all unique and we need things different, each of us.
Absolutely. I would love to keep talking about this for hours and hours, but that is not the situation that we're in. I'd love to just give each of you an opportunity to just sort of that kind of final remark before we go into a little Q&A with our team. So Katie, do you mind if I start with you? Closing thoughts.
That's like we just barely started.
I know.
But what I am studying right now, what like specifically my thesis work is on, is mental health management within the neurodiverse population, because depressive and anxiety disorders that are comorbid with neurodiversity are between 80 and 90% globally reflected. So it is an issue, and a lot of that is stigmatization and misinformation about the brain. People still believe that there's like left-brained and right-brained people, or that there's like specific learning styles and everybody has to have one, instead of the fact that our brains need them all, all brains, neurotypical brains as well as neurodivergent brains. So the fact that you guys are addressing this, the fact that there are multiple agents working towards just understanding how brains work, and that they're all different regardless of whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. Like, everybody has their own different things, and just kind of breaking down the stigma of like, we need to just be doing this thing and be doing it this way, the way that it's been done, the way it's supposed to do, even though it's caused problems. Depressive and anxiety disorders have arisen to an extreme degree over the past 20 years, and a lot of that was like grind set mindset kind of things that aren't congealing with how our bodies work and how our brains work and being present. So there's extreme rates of burnout, especially in tech industries, but also in many industries. Tech industries just happen to cater more towards or have more neurodivergent people in them. But now it feels like it's maybe opening up, like other places, other workplaces are realizing that there are all these different benefits that come with being neurodivergent. So, but with those benefits also come like knowing how your brain works and being able to, use it to, work at your max capacity, but also live at your max capacity, be happy and healthy.
So you're feeling optimistic. The future is bright, or the future is dimmable.
Yeah.
Future is
Flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Darcy, how about you?
I think I
Thoughts?
have to echo Katie to some extent. A lot of the reason I do this work is I feel like if we look at everyone and we realize that they're all unique, and you realize I'm unique, and we all come to the table with unique ideas and experiences and perspectives and ways our brains work. If we just approach people with an open mind and acknowledge their uniqueness and not see it as a difference, I feel like the world's a better place, not just our whole world, not just the work world. And so, I mean, that's my passion for why I do the work I do. And I'm so excited that we're talking about this in particular because I think that we could see the work world really change for the better so that everyone has the opportunity to really do something they love, feel successful, and thrive. And so it's all about approaching everyone as an individual and seeing that uniqueness.
That's great.
I love that. I don't know if I have much more to add on that. I think the only thing that I would add is kind of going back to design and construction is slow. It's a journey. It's a long journey you're on. And I think we often get really excited about these topics as designers at the beginning when we're in design. But we need to remember to carry that inquisitiveness, that curiosity, that kind of openness to thinking about all bodies are different, all minds are different. How do we continue that mindset throughout the duration of a project? And I think kind of the audience today, that's what I would push for, because I think that we often think about it at one point, but it's really important to remember to carry on throughout the entire life cycle. And even when you're operating in a building and what choices you make every day to be more inclusive.
That's great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to turn it now to our team and see if anybody has any specific questions for any or all of our panelists.
I'll go. So I guess we talked a lot about how we take surveys and the design and construction journey is long. I'm curious that after the design and construction journey is done, how do we keep improving?
A great question.
I would love to see in a dream world that there is a budget that is set aside for post-occupancy. Because I think a lot of things after you open, after your people are in it and they're trying things out and working with it. And I think I wish there was like this post-construction phase. I used to always talk about this with a budget and a whole phase and a crew to alter spaces for the, you live in it for 6 months, you try it out, and then you make adjustments and you change it because you can't get everything right on day one. So that's my big push, is to have this new phase in the construction world.
And it definitely needs to be a phase in the project. The project doesn't end when occupancy starts.
Exactly.
Because I think, there may be also things, especially if you consulted with your employees first and, they gave you ideas and you've implemented them. And now that everyone's living it, they're like, well, that wasn't quite right. And so how do we make those adjustments? Because at the end of the day, you are doing this for your staff and you want them to have that feeling of this is a really great place for me to work. And so you've got to have that. I think that phase is super important. And the budget in particular, it's not just, we're going to take a look at it, but the budget to make change.
I was going to ask, I think we have hit on a lot of the great points regarding sort of differences in cognition and how the space can support different levels of privacy, focus, collaboration. And then I think I'd love to hear a little bit more. I think Katie, you kind of touched on it, how spaces can more support movement, either circulation zones, spaces for movement, furniture for movement, a little bit of that sort of the stimming and the different movement needs people might have.
Yeah, a lot of that is just recognition that people need to, well, specifically neurodivergent people, but probably everyone needs to move around every about 45 minutes to an hour. Everybody's window is a little bit different, but I set my timer to do that because that's about my rhythm. It seems to be pretty typical. So as long as you're making allowances for like behavioral differences, for like, I need to get up and take a walk, or I need to get up and go to this room for a little bit, recognizing that maybe the day structure is going to look a little bit different. That's kind of, like you're saying, lenience as far as expectations go, like sitting at a desk, we already know what it does to the back. We know what it does to the body. We know it does when there's not like abilities to have breaks to move. Getting endorphins, like raising your endorphins the fastest way, aside from just touch, like any sort of touch, is movement, is exercise. So it's extremely important. We actually talk about movement a lot at school just because it makes a world of difference. Like even just having a 10-minute break where everybody gets up and does a little something.